Conversation with FP columnist and professor of international affairs, Stephen Walt, on the state of NATO.
I think you're there.
Okay.
Oh, good morning, everybody. So, Madam Ambassador, NATO is about to celebrate its 75th anniversary. We're going to hear a lot of speeches about its virtues, its many accomplishments, its continued importance. What kind of shape is NATO really in today, given that there are also voices raising doubts about its future? And how does this look from your perspective?
I think it is very strong. I think that people will see that we are building not only the longest-serving, best security alliance in the history of the world, but I think we are now going forward to look at our common threats, our common risks, and looking at a way that we can unite like-minded, security-minded, freedom-loving people. I think it is strong. I think it's getting stronger. And considering the internal problems that so many countries are having right now, ours for sure, Europe for sure, NATO is a bulwark that is working, adapting, and I think the adapting is the secret for why NATO has remained so vibrant. Yes, there have been ups and downs, but it has stayed together, increased in value, increased in membership, because it is a steady hand at the wheel.
Say more about adapting. What does NATO need to do going forward if it's to remain a successful alliance?
I think it needs to adopt the common risk that we face in the world today with autocrats that are well-armed and have been able to stay strong, in fact, build strength against the freedom countries of the world. And I think we've got to adopt the common umbrella of security, and I think NATO will play the role of being the convener of the like-minded. NATO has 32 allies, which we all know, but NATO has 40 partners. We have partners in the Middle East. We have partners in South America. We have partners in Asia. And I think it is very important that we keep reaching out to those who want to be a part of a security alliance. And I think NATO is the treaty organization that can do that, and really the only one.
Okay. Let me ask you a harder question. Why does the United States have to keep helping protect Europe? I mean, Europe has 3 to 4 times Russia's population. It has 8 times its GDP. NATO's European members spend 3 to 4 times what Russia spends on defense every single year. So you'd think that the nations of Europe could handle the security problems they obviously have from Russia. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually. So why does the United States have to stay?
I think now more than ever, the U.S. and Canada working with Europe is important. Now, NATO was founded because America got into World War I and World War II late, after hundreds of thousands of lives were lost, carnage, it affected our economies. And our leaders said, we need America in early. And in fact, America is the leader of NATO. We are the country that will assess a risk and then deter against that risk. And we're the ones who will do it, and our European allies look to us to do it. And I think that's why it's so important that we remain the head. Going forward, I think the fact that what would we do if we had another world war? We wouldn't have trading partners if we just let Europe go and it becomes a turmoil. Europe is our solid partner. It's an economic partner. And when you think ahead to this risk that we're talking about, what would we have to deter China? In my opinion, we have economic strength. China will probably have more military, bigger navies, more weapons, more missiles. They'll have nuclear. They've got space. They have a space station. They've got all of that. But what if they had an internal economic crisis because none of the major economies of the world were investing there, doing business there, creating jobs there? It would be the collapse of their economy that would be our best leverage in China. So how do we have that unity? We have that unity by having the democracies and the strong economies allied together in a security relationship.
I'm glad you brought up China because, the Pentagon would call China the pacing threat that we really need to focus on. Does NATO have much of a role to play in the Indo-Pacific? You've alluded to economics here, but if we're told on the one hand NATO's European members can't defend themselves without American help, it's hard for me to see how they're going to do very much in the Indo-Pacific. They just don't have the military capabilities to affect the balance of power there. So does NATO have a role to play other than symbolic?
Yes, I mean, if America is speaking with one voice, that would be a big lift. But we're speaking with 70 voices. We are sharing information. We are building an industrial base with 70 countries, 32 allies who have the pledge, which is a deterrence. But we've got 70 in a coalition now, and new countries are beginning to ask how they can be part of NATO, in South America, for instance. And what would be better for America than to have security allies that are building military capabilities, stronger democracies in South America?
Yeah, wouldn't it make more sense for Europe to take much more responsibility for its own defense so that the United States could focus its assets on the Indo-Pacific, which is of greater economic importance, and it's where, again, the primary great power rival that we face?
We need both, absolutely. Yes, Europe should be doing more. Every president with whom I've served as a senator, as well as an ambassador, everyone has said Europe needs to do more, and they agree. I mean, my colleagues in NATO, the European colleagues would say, we know we need to do more. We want you to press. So we do, because they don't think security first, at least they haven't. They think economy first. They are looking at more trade, more economic building. That's why the EU came together. But we think security first. America is the leader in thinking security builds strong economies. And if we have a security relationship with our European allies, but moving into Asia as well, that is our strongest leverage against any adversary, is if we are united. If it's just America speaking, yes, we will prevail. It will be harder, and we may lose more in the process. But if we have 70 partners in the same direction with the strongest economies of the world, isn't that a better position?
It might be. I mean, you could argue that some of those partners add a lot, and some of the other partners don't add nearly as much, and actually may require more assets being devoted to protecting them than they're able to contribute to the common defense. And that's, I think, one of the issues that has been raised, repeatedly. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on American domestic politics, but I do want to ask you the following question. At the most general level, Republicans and Democrats right now seem to have slightly different views about NATO. Democrats seem to think it's wonderful, strongly supportive, and that's true of many Republicans, yourself included, as you've made clear here. But there are also voices in the Republican Party, possibly former President Trump, J.D. Vance, Rand Paul, who have a somewhat more skeptical view, or at least have expressed more skeptical views. How worried should Europeans be about what might happen here in the United States?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think you are missing that the fringes on both parties are the skeptics. And it's not just Republican fringe. There is a Democratic fringe that also is skeptical of spending all of this security money, military money, and wanting the money that we have to go instead to social programs. So I think that the vast middle in Congress and in the American public understand the importance of alliances and the importance of security. So are we worried? I think the bill that Congress passed that was very bipartisan, that was signed into law last December, no president can leave NATO without a 2/3 vote of the Senate, a vote of Congress. So I'm not worried that we're going to lose the strength of the alliance. And I think that the leaders in our security efforts in the Senate and the House, and you're going to have Mike McCall today and Ro Khanna, they are very pro-alliance, pro-NATO, as are the leaders in the Democratic side, on the Senate side. And that's going to be so important for us to keep that strength. And I think it will. And I'm not worried that Congress is going to walk away. I do think we need to, because the voices on the fringes are saying, why are we spending all this money on defense or defense of Europe or Ukraine, which we must support, and I know that's going to come out a lot today as well. But that's for our protection. It is in our interest to have that kind of an alliance.
Right. The difference is that the members of the Democratic fringe who might be skeptical of NATO aren't likely to run for president. And one of the skeptics on the Republican side is running for president. And even if a future Trump administration didn't leave NATO, a commander-in-chief who was less enthusiastic about, say, fulfilling an Article 5 commitment is something I would think Europeans should and would worry greatly about.
Well, I think the vast majority of Republicans are going to be the key here, and they are totally committed to our alliances and our security strength.
Okay. So we're getting near the end of our time here. I do want to bring up Ukraine just to get your perspective on this. We're undoubtedly going to see a variety of expressions of support for Ukraine at the summit this week, possibly some additional measures designed to indicate that support. We're not going to see, it seems to me, imminent NATO membership or anything like that for Ukraine. What about the war itself? What are the prospects for something that might look like a genuine Ukrainian victory at this point? And if those prospects are looking maybe a little bit unrealistic or far-fetched, should NATO and the United States be beginning to push more for some kind of ceasefire before Ukraine loses more territory, before Ukraine is damaged even more?
I think one thing that has happened, it happened too late, but it's finally happening, is we are giving now Ukraine what they should have had from the beginning, which is the ability to strike Russian bases that are launching the drones and the missiles that are destroying Ukraine. We should have allowed them to do that from the beginning with our weapons, but we put restrictions on it. But now those restrictions are finally being lifted, and we also are finally giving them the F-16s, which I had hoped we would do earlier as well. But we've got to help them win. They can't win a stalemate. We've got to help them win, and I support what is now beginning to show that. That's what the military has said from the beginning, and we do need a win for Ukraine. when I was at NATO, our military guys used to tell me that the Russian military had been completely brainwashed by Putin, that the worst thing that ever happened in Russian history was the breakdown of the Soviet Union, and that Gorbachev was a traitor. That's what he imbued in his military, which is why he's got them out there fighting to recreate the Soviet Union. That's where he's trying to go. So we've got to stop it now. We've got to help Ukraine fight for themselves. When our troops are not on the ground, they're the ones dying, but we need to help them defend their country. It is in our interest that this not escalate or go forward. Because if Putin wins in Ukraine, you see he started with Georgia, then Crimea, which is Ukraine, now the Donbass and that part of Ukraine that they're occupying. If they win here, there will be no holds on Putin. He will get the support of the Russian people with a victory. We can't let it happen. We have to be united, and I think we are.
Okay. We are not out of important topics. I think we could probably go another half an hour on that last comment alone, but we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank Ambassador Hutchinson.